As we talked about, the correct answer to a necessary assumption question is something that needs to be true in order for the argument to be valid. Or in other words, the negation of a necessary assumption will make the argument invalid. So let's make sure that we completely understand that idea. So consider this example. My neighbor's wearing a black cape and has blood dripping from his mouth, therefore he must be a vampire. The core assumption that the argument's making is that the premise presented is enough to prove the conclusion. In other words, if somebody's wearing a black cape and has blood dripping from their mouth, then that proves he is a vampire. That's necessary because if it weren't true, if somebody who's wearing a black cape and has blood dripping from his mouth might not be a vampire, then the conclusion cannot automatically follow from the fact that we see him in a black cape with blood dripping from his mouth. There's at least some chance that this person is a vampire, but I don't know, maybe the neighbor just has like weird fashion sense and bad dental hygiene. Other assumptions that are necessary include smaller, weaker versions of the core assumption. For example, at least some individuals who wear a black cape and have blood dripping from their mouths are vampires. That's necessary for this argument to work because if it weren't true, if nobody who's wearing the cape and has the blood dripping is a vampire, then the conclusion doesn't automatically follow from the premise. In fact, the conclusion would be false. Or how about this? Whether one has a black cape and has blood dripping from one's mouth is relevant to whether that person is a vampire. That's also absolutely necessary for this argument to work because if it weren't true, if the cape and the blood dripping were not relevant to whether someone's a vampire, then we have no basis to conclude that my neighbor's a vampire. It's still theoretically possible that he is one, but the premise offered would provide no support for the conclusion because the cape and the blood would just be totally irrelevant to it. And that's what makes this statement necessary to this argument. Notice that all of these examples are pretty weak statements. Typically on necessary assumption questions, the logical force of the correct answer choice is weak. It's not always the case, but most of the time we like weak choices on these questions.